welcome to BookMob episode 74. Today I'm going to be talking about a new release book, one that I've been waiting for a long time, and it's Robert Galbraith's The Hallmarked Man. It's the 8th novel in the fantastic and entertaining series by Galbraith AKA J.K. Rowling, about the strike. It's the strike detective agency series, and it is basically a brilliant, fun, entertaining read. I mean, basically from number 1, The Cuckoo's Calling, to The Hallmarked Man, the latest in Galbraith's strike series. Basically, Galbraith has created a really sort of magical universe of criminals, thugs, and serial killers, and cops, and relationships and characters. A fantastic read. It's one of those books, or one of those series of books that come along that can entice and grip readers and hesitant readers and non-readers alike. So basically, Strike is Cormoran Strike, and with his partner Robin Ellacott, I should say. They're basically two detectives working out of their Denmark Street office in London, and apparently it is an actual address. I think the address that Galbraith came up with does exist. So, you know, if you live in London, there is in actual fact now an official Cormoran Strike Walking Tour, and that's narrated by Robert Glenister, and I'm not sure who that is, but it's a 5-kilometer walk, narrated, basically taking you through the streets of London, and it stops at the key locations that have been used throughout the 8 novels in the Strike series. So, if I was in London, I would certainly take one of those tours. It would be fun to do. Okay, when you think about it, I mean, if you think about Sherlock Holmes and Watson, you've got Strike and Ellacott. I mean, there is a sense of Baker Street going on here. But I think I wouldn't. That sort of the sort of a detective imperatives kind of ends there. I mean, because both Ellacott and Strike are very unique characters. One does not follow the other, whereas Watson stumbles alongside Sherlock Holmes. And it's kind of like I wouldn't say, I mean, I love Sherlock Holmes. I wouldn't say Watson is a buffoon. He is a sort of semi-partner, whereas Ellacott and Strike are, over the 8 novels, are coming together as a single unit in the detective agency. So who knows if people, I mean, I guess it's easy to make, make comparisons to former detective duos, but I think that Galbraith has used, I mean, and this is in the lightest sense, has used Sherlock Holmes and Watson as a sort of template, but not really in anything serious. Though, if you want to read Sherlock Holmes and Watson's, I highly recommend it, because they are very entertaining stories. However, Galbraith has produced brilliant stories that are thick, that are dense, and are filled with great characters, great events, great stories. I mean, it's a page turner. You can't get away from that. Okay, when you look at 8 novels of a series, it's very challenging and difficult to say which is my favorite, because each one grows. I mean, it's almost like from The Cuckoo's Calling, number 1, to The Hallmarked Man, there is a growth, there is a maturity, there is a sense of you, the reader, because, and I'm talking about people who've read the previous novels, and if you haven't, I highly recommend you get stuck into it with The Cuckoo's Calling #1. What I'm saying is that the progression of characterization, the progression of the maturity of the characters is so much more richer from 1 to 8. I mean, it's quite outstanding that a very well-known author can produce almost on demand by the publishers, I assume, such engaging, entertaining stories. And even though they are, how many pages was this one? I mean, I think it was into the 900s. Almost 900 pages. Just good stuff. Just great stuff. And I must admit that when I finished it, I was disappointed because I loved reading it. It was literally a gripping read from page 1. Now, one of the things I want to talk about is in Galbraith's newest book, I mean, she has done this before. If you look at you see up here, those are called epigrams. An epigram is it's like a poem or a wording or a quote that is used at the beginning of chapters, and in some way epigrams are trying to tell the story. They're trying to tell you what's coming up, or they're trying to give you subtle hints about what is to come. And because the Hallmarked Man is a bloody page turner, every time you finish a chapter, and the chapters aren't that long, they're quite swift, and you get through them pretty quick because you just cannot, you just want to know what goes on. So the epigrams are a kind of like a pause. The reader gets to pause because I just feel that without the epigrams, you would just fly through this novel at a much quicker pace because it's so addictive, it's so entertaining, it's so enjoyable that you just want to keep going. You want to find out what happens next. And the epigrams, now Galbraith chose various writers, one particular novel, but the one I found, there's Robert Browning, who was I think a 19th century poet. I haven't studied Browning. I've read some Browning, and I can tell you one thing: Robert Browning is one of the most difficult and challenging poets to read. Now, I did some research, and I actually asked Google. I said, "Why is Browning so difficult to understand and comprehend?" And it's basically, in order to fully engage in Browning, you've got to have such a thick knowledge. You've got to understand so much about literature, the Bible, history, architecture, myths and legends, and Greek and Romans, poetry. And it just, so Browning is obviously a very, very, he was obviously a genius of learning and education. So when you finish a chapter and Browning is, and I made it my mission to read the epigrams. I wanted to read them to get the fullest experience out of The Hallmarked Man by Robert Galbraith. And epigrams, the Browning epigrams were so difficult. It was in a way entertainingly frustrating. But I did notice that if I focused on the epigrams, read them more than once, I must admit, it allowed you to collect your mind, because the Hallmarked Man, like all of the Strike novels, is just packed with characters, like multiple layers of characters, cases that because Galbraith mixes in a main storyline, a main narrative, and in that mix, she has created stories about the other cases the detectives are following up on. And sometimes, not always, there is an interconnecting idea between some cases, but mostly there are independent cases. And when you read the book, the sort of plethora of names, of characters, of customers and clients, and protagonists and antagonists, it can become quite stressful when you don't follow the stream of the main narrative. And again, I think that's fantastic. I think it's great that Galbraith has created taken from a very, very basic genre, the detective novel, and she's trying to sort of lift it into a more superior arena. With the epigrams, with the poetry, with the quotes from various books, novels. She's giving you, the reader, the opportunity to expand your mind, at the same time to learn more. And also, if you read the epigrams, the idea is whether or not the epigram is worthy of its place in the chapter. And obviously with Galbraith, it is. There is something going on. And I must admit, because I have a very, very superficial understanding of Browning, it just became very difficult. And I started taking some of the epigrams and going on the internet, trying to work them out. But I found that was just a bridge too far. It was better for me to read them in my best ability and then get on with a chapter, because once I started researching Browning's poems or verses from poems or stanzas from poems, I got too involved in trying to work out what Galbraith was trying to say per chapter. So all I'm saying is, as a reader, the epigrams can be frustrating in some sense. They can be disconcerting. It does break the narrative. It does spoil the pure enjoyment of reading a detective mystery from page 1 to 900. However, I think Galbraith has done this deliberately in order for readers to slow down, to get some sense of story and narrative, to think about the characters and the events happening in the novel, and the epigraphs are a perfect way of getting you the full feast of the novel itself. So, I mean, that's my personal take. Basically, look, this is just a page turner. You can gorge on this novel non-stop. And on X, I've seen various people say they've read it twice already. I could have read this in probably a couple of sittings, very short sittings, but I really wanted to enjoy the story. So I had to I had to put it down occasionally because I was getting too far ahead of myself. That's how good it is. I mean, that's how good a novel the Hallmarked Man is. And I feel the same about the previous 7 novels. So, there is something magical going on. Look, I think I've read one Harry Potter book. I was never a big fan. I'm not a big fan of fantasy magic stuff. And I took a risk with the Cuckoo's Calling right at the beginning, and I was hooked from page 1. So there is no need, and I guess J.K. Rowling chose Robert Galbraith as a pseudonym or a pen name or whatever you want to call it, because she didn't want people to avoid, people who say don't enjoy fantasy, juvenile literature, crossing over to adult literature. And I think she made the right decision. However, I think because it's so well known now, I think she can quite freely take Robert away and put J.K. back in. That's just my opinion. Look, The Hallmarked Man is a complex and very challenging read. Loads of characters and just an incessant sort of a barrage of events, situations, dialogues. It becomes, and that's what's great about the book. It's so challenging to read. But ultimately, the main narrative about the initial murder of the body in the vault in the silversmith's shop is carries all the way through. And there's no spoilers on the show. It's basically, I'm telling you, or I'm asking you, or I'm recommending, if you don't read, if you're a hesitant reader, if you're a good reader, if you've never read Galbraith, take a chance, because it really does drop you into a universe of thugs, scum, and crims and coppers, and it's well done. It's fun to read, and I guess the one, I mean, I wouldn't say it's terrible, but if you don't know about Strike, if you don't know about Cormoran and Robin's relationship, it can come across as heavy-handed. The sort of romantic part of it it plays a great role, as two opposites attract. And this novel, The Hallmarked Man, the 8th novel in the series, really does concentrate in a sub-narrative about their individual feelings about each other. And I just, while I was reading, I was thinking, these two don't belong together as a romantic couple. They just, they may want to, they may have desires, they may have lusts, but both of them are looking for partners in life. They both of these characters, Cormoran and Robin, are both seeking love, romance, and stability and monogamy. Yet when you look at the way they live their lives, there is just no way these two can ever come together. But I think Galbraith is trying to create she's kind of pushing them together and then separates them through various events. And the sort of Cormoran, who's a pretty tough dude with one leg, who sort of sold his loving soul to wanting Robin as not just as a lover, but as a partner, kind of, to me, it doesn't make sense. They just do not, they're great as friends, they're great as business partners, they're great as detectives. They just do not belong together in a romantic sense. So I'm not sure where Galbraith is going to go with the next novel, because she's promised 10 novels in the Strike series, and we're up to number 8. So number 9 and number 10, I assume that she will probably, this is just my, so maybe in 2028 or 29, come back to me and tell me that I was wrong. But I think that Galbraith is going to kill off one of the characters in a very tragic sense. That's what I think she's aiming for, is two people who finally get together, but one of them dies in some tragic sense. And I think that's going to happen. One other thing I'd say, I love the relationship between the detective agency and the Metropolitan Police, where there's a mixed bag. People hate Strike's agency because he's pretty smart, he gets shit done, and at the same time there are people in the agents in the police force who can understand that Cormoran Strike can do things that the police are handcuffed not to be able to do, that he can do illegal things in order to get knowledge, to find facts, to get evidence. And it runs thickly through the entire narrative, because Robin Ellacott is having a relationship with a copper, an alcoholic copper, who is also sort of struggling, knowing that he's in love with someone who's in the private realm, but he's still got his own responsibilities as a member of a government organization that has to follow certain rules. Anyway, all I can say is, what a great novel, what a great book, what a fun read, entertaining, just marvelous. It's probably not my, I don't know, I always think, what's my favorite? I don't know, it's so hard. I'm a big fan of the Ink Black Heart, the previous, I think that's the previous one or the one before that. Anyway, The Hallmarked Man is a worthy read. It's a fun read, and I highly recommend it to readers, non-readers, and hesitant readers everywhere. All right, so I just finished Oswald's Tale by Norman Mailer, which is going to be part of my 100 great novels episode that I'm still working on. If you ever, the one thing about this book is that it's hypothesis is that Lee Harvey Oswald was a lone shooter. And when you read this, you kind of, I agree. I always thought that Lee Harvey Oswald, it wasn't a conspiracy. I do believe that there are people in the world who create, who make massive historical changes from their own self. That there's no need for a conspiracy in order to change the world. And I think Mailer writes very, very strongly. And, it's a great read it up. And I'm now reading for the second time. Actually, I read Oswald Tale about 20 years ago. I'm reading it again. And this is a memoir on writing by Stephen King, which is a great book because it talks about his youth, his introduction to writing, his desire to become a writer. It's a great book and having a fun read. All right, that's it for BookMob episode 74. I hope you guys stay till the end, and I'm looking forward to coming to you next time with another episode. I'm not my greatest 100 novels to read is probably going to take a bit longer than I thought, so I'll just keep banging on with that one. And I'll see you in the libraries, in the secondhand bookstores, and in the bookshops. And just keep reading, enjoy reading, love reading. Thanks. Bye.